Hi everyone, for learning outcome number 2 of module 11, which is actually the last learning outcome of module 11, we're going to be covering the tracts of the urinary system. So basically, how the urine that's made in the kidneys leaves the body. First, we have the ureters, that are these pair of muscular tubes that extend inferiorly from the kidneys before reaching the urinary bladder. And each ureter will begin as a continuation of the renal pelvis through the hilum. As the ureters extend to the urinary bladder, they pass inferiorly and medially over the psoas major muscle, as we can see right over here from this image. So this is the psoas major. Here we have the kidneys. Here are your ureters on both sides. You can see how they're leaving the kidney, passing over the psoas major, and going down into the urinary bladder. On this image, we don't have the urinary bladder, but on this other one we have. And on the next slide, we will cover the urinary bladder. So the ureters just serve mainly as a tube that will transport the urine that was formed in the kidneys from the kidneys all the way down to the urinary bladder. And the urinary bladder is going to be this hollow muscular organ that functions as this temporary storage reservoir for urine. In the male, the base of the urinary bladder lies between the rectum and the pubic symphysis. In the female, the base of the urinary bladder will sit inferior to the uterus and anterior to the vagina. And this is why when women become pregnant, they feel the need to pee all the time because of the weight of the uterus. The dimensions of the urinary bladder, they will vary depending on the state of distension, meaning that it depends on how much urine is in the urinary bladder. Remember that the urinary bladder epithelium is made of transitional epithelium, meaning that the cells stretch as the bladder fills up with urine. Notice how the male urinary bladder is bigger than the female urinary bladder. On average, the male can hold up to 700 mLs of urine, and the females can hold up to 500 mLs of urine. Now, the ureters penetrate the posterior wall of the urinary bladder without entering the peritoneal cavity. Notice from this image the ureters coming down, and then once they reach the urinary bladder, we don't see them anymore because now they're running posterior to the urinary bladder, and they will pass through the bladder wall at this oblique angle and empty at what we call the urethral opening, which are these openings right over here. Now, these openings are slit-like rather than rounded, and this shape helps prevent the backflow of urine toward the ureter and kidneys when the urinary bladder contracts. And the muscularis layer of the urinary bladder is going to be formed by two longitudinal muscle layers, an outer one and an inner one. And there's going to be a circular muscle layer that's going to be squished between these two longitudinal layers. And all three muscle layers are known as the detrusor muscle of the urinary bladder. So contraction of this muscle compresses the urinary bladder and expels its contents into the urethra. Now, this triangular area bounded by the urethral openings and the entrance to the urethra constitute the trigone of the urinary bladder. The trigone will act like a funnel that channels the urine into the urethra when the urinary bladder contracts. The urethral entrance lies at the apex of the trigone at the most inferior point in the urinary bladder, which makes sense. So right over here would start the male urethra. And how do I know that this is the male urethra? Well, this is the prostate, and the male urethra passes inside the prostate. On this other model, it might be easier to visualize. Here is the urinary bladder. Under the urinary bladder, we find the prostate. Same thing on this other model. Urinary bladder. Under the urinary bladder, we see the prostate, and inside the prostate gland, we find the urethra. So the urethra will extend from the urinary bladder to the exterior. The female and male urethra, they differ in length and in function. Notice how in female the urethra is very short, only between 3 to 5 centimeters from the urinary bladder to the outside, which is also called the vestibule. Also notice how in females the urethra opening is very close to the vagina, which is not too far from the anus. In male, the urethra extends from the urinary bladder to the tip of the penis, a distance that may be between 18 to 20 centimeters. I know some men might say that it's much longer, but let's go with the average. Also, the male urethra is so much longer that it is divided into 3 parts. The part that passes through the prostate is what we call the prostatic urethra. Makes sense, right? Then we have a very small portion that passes through this muscle that is called the urogenital diaphragm. Makes sense. It's a muscle between the uro part, so the urinary part, and the genitalia, so urogenital diaphragm. And here the urethra will be called the membranous urethra. From here, all the rest is called the spongy urethra because it will pass through the corpus spongiosum. And for now, this is all you need to know about the penis. Now notice how the opening for the male urethra is very far away from the anus. And this is why women are more prone to UTIs or urinary tract infections, because of the close proximity between the female urethra and the anus. One way to prevent female UTIs is to clean yourself from front to back. This way you prevent from bringing feces from the anus into the urethra, which might cause an infection, as you can imagine.